My friends, good evening. Last year, a story made the headlines in a particularly tragic way. It was the sinking of the BAYESIAN under circumstances that we will detail today. Today we know more. That's why I'm here, making this video. This is the most complete video available online in any language. About this story, we're going to go through it minute by minute, and I'm going to tell you what happened. So we are on the Mitterrand off the coast of Italy. We have a number of guests who have taken their seats aboard the BAYESIAN. The BAYESIAN is a super yacht, a luxury yacht built in Italy in 2008. It has a special feature. It has a huge mast. It's equipped with a 72-meter mast that can be seen from afar. You'd practically have to put it horizontally on your screen for it to fit. It was built that way, and we planned a counterweight on the other side. That means underwater you can't see it, but underwater normally there's a keel. This keel is at the end of a 10-meter arm and it weighs 60 tons. It's to balance this mast which catches a lot of wind, especially when the sails are out. But even without sails, given its length and an aerodynamic effect that we'll describe later, well, it's capable of pushing hard on the ship when there's wind. One important little detail is that this keel, since it's 10 meters deep, will create a huge turning circle for these sailboats. That means it won't reach many ports, since lots aren't 10 meters deep. So what happened is that we installed the keel at the end of a telescopic arm. That means this arm is able to retract up to 4 meters, and it is actually able, when we deploy it, to reach up to 10 meters under 4 meters. You guessed it, that's what allows us to enter the ports. The ship's second feature is that its Italian manufacturers claim it is unsinkable. It can't sink, and unfortunately we'll find this phrase in every tragedy. As soon as someone tells you that a ship can't sink, run for your life. So, on August 14, 2024, I said that a number of people would board this ship. So what we have is 12 people, 12 guests as we say. There's the owner, Mr. Lynch, who is there. And there's his 18-year-old daughter, Anna. And then there's his lawyer and his wife. There's a jeweler and his wife. There's even a couple with a 1-year-old baby. And there's also a partner, his wife as well. What was the idea? The idea is that Mr. Lynch had been acquitted in a case that made headlines around the world. At the time, he had started a company with a friend. The company grew very large. It was sold to Hewlett-Packard or Packard for 10 billion pounds sterling. My friends, it's a British company that sold for 10 billion pounds. So that later Hewlett-Packard said, we were scammed, it's not worth that much, and they went to court for fraud. Just me. They wanted to send Mr. Lynch to prison. Of course he'll fight, he's extradited to the United States, and few gave him a chance. In the United States, fraud is punished severely. He could have faced 70 years in prison. A bolt from the blue, a dramatic turn of events. He's free, he walks out free. He who could have died in a shabby penitentiary, well, he's free. He comes out triumphant, smiling, flanked by his lawyers. He takes the plane, he returns to Europe, and they celebrate. And to celebrate properly, he will go to his ship, the BAYESIAN, registered in London, home port London. Which in itself, when you look, there's a slight side to it. There you go, my ship is registered in London because nobody registers their ship in London. It's so expensive that usually people prefer Hamilton, or they'd rather go to the Seychelles or Liberia or Panama than register a ship of that size in London. But he wanted to assert that difference. He left the United States, as I was saying, where he faced legal threats. He left for Europe in glory, without realizing that other dangers were waiting for him. I was saying 12 people had boarded the ship, those were the guests, and there were 10 crew members, so 22 people were on board. The journey began on August 14th, it started on the 14th. They sailed a little around the islands, did a bit of a tour of the Mediterranean. In August, it's the perfect place to take a walk. And then the fateful night we're going to talk about, the night of the 18th to the 19th. Well, tragically, it was the last night on board. in both the literal and figurative sense. That means that in the morning at 8 a.m. there were taxis scheduled to come pick them up from the docks and take them away. It was over. 5 days of travel ended that night, so the next day was disembarkation. The guests will stay late, they'll talk, drink and eat until about 12:30. So it's already the 19th, 12:30. They will all go to sleep. The one who will also go to sleep is the skipper, the captain, if you like. So the captain, he's going to sleep, but before that he'll give instructions. He'll leave 2 men. So the 2 men who are there, one is a steward. The steward stays up all night. Because if a guest wakes up or is at the door of their cabin or rings at 3 a.m. to ask for an aspirin, ask for a glass of water, ask for something to be cooked for them, the steward is there for that. And then he also leaves one on duty. Actually, he leaves 2 men on duty, but they take turns each time. One is sleeping and one is there. He'll instruct the men on duty, I'm going to sleep, if the wind exceeds the thresholds. We're talking about 36 or 37 kilometers. So if ever the wind exceeds the thresholds, or if ever the boat starts to drift while pulling on its anchor, will you wake me up? Actually, that night he had Météo France, which had some pretty alarming forecasts for the Mediterranean. There was a very strong convective energy in the region. And this actually created a situation where big storms could form very quickly. And then in an instant, change the situation anywhere. By the way, Bayesian had moved about 40 kilometers that evening. He wasn't supposed to spend the night at that place. He was supposed to spend the night somewhere else. But it was decided that offshore, a few hundred meters from Porticello, that picturesque little port, it was decided that it was safer. So in a way you could almost say they threw themselves into the lion's den by leaving from another place and coming exactly to where the story I'm telling you takes place. By the way, speaking of storms, there were in the distance at that moment, at 12:30, there were some flashes in the distance. We saw some flashes in the sky, but they were far away and the wind was just 8 knots. We're talking about roughly 14-15 kilometers per hour. The sea was calm, and next to the Bayesian, another boat had also found refuge. It's 3 in the morning, the first watchman is asleep and the second has taken his place. He keeps watching the flashes, the storms, and realizes that they have gotten much closer. Even though at the moment the wind is still weak and the sea is calm as oil. Half an hour later, guests in their cabin are going to wake up. They feel some strange movements, it wakes them up, but they won't go out. They'll stay in their cabin, but they won't be able to fall back asleep. Winds will slowly strengthen. And then it's 3:55. It's almost 4 in the morning. Well, suddenly a heavy rain starts to fall. The man on watch starts running across the boat to close all the doors, close all the hatches and openings. This is an important detail, as it was then suspected the shipbuilder had suggested it, that potentially some openings were left and that this accelerated the fate of the ship. Today we know that this is not the case. Everything was closed. By the time he finished closing everything, he realized that the wind had picked up. At that point, there were 30 knots of wind. It had gone from 8 to 30 knots in just a few minutes. That means we're almost at 60 kilometers per hour. And then he also notices that the Bayesian is slowly drifting. That means that despite the anchor is starting to drag. It's drifting south and slightly offshore. By the way, the other ship, which was parked not far away, is also starting to follow the same path. A few moments before 4 in the morning, the man on watch realizes that it's not just his imagination, but this time the storm is extremely close. and that the ship is really drifting, pulling on its anchor, and the anchor isn't holding anymore, and it's dragging it along. The ship next to it is also dragging its anchor. What is this man doing? First, he's going to take his phone, he's going to film the storm. He uploads it to his social media, and from there he decides to go wake up the captain or the skipper. He goes into his cabin, he knocks, he wakes him up, he says, listen, I'm not too sure about this, I don't like what's happening. There's too much wind, 30 knots here already. That means it picked up very quickly in just a few minutes from 8 to 30. That means this time we've got about 55 or 56 kilometers per hour of wind. And then, of course, the ship was dragging its anchor. So the two men come back up. At the same time, someone else is going to wake up. It's the chief engineer. He felt the ship moving a little. He wasn't happy about the movement and knew bad weather was coming. So he wakes up and goes straight to start the engines. He knows those huge sails leave no time to take them out, and that it would be necessary, especially with such wind, that this time he would have to use the engines to maneuver the ship and try to control it. Also, the ship next to them had its engine at full power, but was still drifting. They had to act quickly. Meanwhile, the whole crew is going to wake up. The crew members are going to wake up and start running through the corridors, through the passageways, going up, going down, calling out to each other. Note that there's already a certain sense of urgency here, because normally we have extremely wealthy guests. We're careful, we walk on tiptoes so as not to disturb them, not to disturb their sleep. And now suddenly everyone is shouting at each other. An emergency situation is starting to develop somewhere. The couple with the baby, I was saying there's a couple with a baby, a 1-year-old girl. Well, they decide to go back up. In a way, it's their parental instinct that makes them feel uneasy. From the boat's cabin, the floor was already tilted 20 degrees at that point. Then suddenly they no longer want to be there. What do? They go out, they go up, and they reach the upper deck. Another person is going to arrive on the upper deck. Mr. Lynch, the owner, he's going to arrive. He looks. And with that, sailor comes in, completely soaked. He was outside, he got caught in a heavy burst of rain. And so he sees him and then suddenly thinks that taxis for 8 a.m. might be a bit too early. Since the night might be eventful and the weather is bad, he's thinking about cancelling the taxis. They're just a few hundred meters from the dock, so he has reception. That's pretty much what he's thinking about at that moment. Yet there are several people. It's 4:06, everything's going wrong. The wind suddenly rose from 30 to 130 kilometers per hour. Within minutes, the ship tilts 60 degrees, terrible gusts hit. And there's the couple who had woken up at 3:30 who decide to leave their cabin and go up. It was the last opportunity for those who still wanted to go to the upper deck and have a chance to survive. The skipper learns that the engines have started. He is about to begin his maneuver to turn the ship into the wind. And he doesn't even have time to start it. It was BAYESIAN, that's enough. 501 subtitling ST 501. Touch the water. This time it's too late. The engines by an automatic safety device stop. And then the emergency lighting comes on. People are thrown into the water. These people who were a couple and had a baby find themselves thrown into the water and separated. The woman with the child and the husband, she doesn't know where he is. While she's in the water struggling, she feels the waves tearing her child away from her. And then suddenly she's going to lose him. For 3 seconds, she's going to lose the baby before she can catch him. The couple who had come back up is also thrown into the water. So there is one. He finds himself trapped in an air pocket, and then he refuses to go down with the boat. And what does he do? With all the energy of despair, in the few seconds of opportunity he has left, he dives, he goes to a door, Groping, he finds it, he opens it, it's a sliding door, and he gets out. From that moment on, all those who couldn't get out will never get out. The survivors, the castaways, start shouting in the water, gathering together, clinging to floating objects. There's one who's injured in the arm. It's a pretty nasty wound, and a sailor puts a tourniquet on him. In the water, he puts on a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. He looks ahead of them, and they have Bayesian, who is lying in a grotesque position. The owner, Mr. Lynch, was last seen by a sailor when the ship was at 60 degrees and water had started to come in. He had helped him climb some stairs, but he hasn't seen him. He probably went back to look for his 18-year-old daughter, who must have been sleeping in her cabin. It's 4:24. The castaways for long minutes are floating in the water, swept by a strong wind, the rain, clinging to whatever they can. There are two sailors who manage to swim toward the Bayesian, which hasn't sunk yet. It's lying on its side, but it hasn't sunk. They manage to swim to the boat and are able to release two inflatable rafts. These are circular rafts with rain protection. They manage to release two of them. The first one refuses to inflate. Unfortunately, the second one opens. Gradually, they get inside. The couple who woke up at 3:30 is there. The couple with the baby is there. They are in this a fragile boat. And then they try to pick up as many people as possible, and they will get on this boat. 10 minutes later, they try to get attention. They start firing flares. They launch a first distress flare. The wind quickly carries this away, unseen by anyone. With their phone and everything, they try to signal toward the road. They see the nearby road, hotels and windows, but it's night and everyone is asleep. They're just trying to get attention, to say we're here. They're going to launch 10 minutes later. It's 4:34. They're going to launch a second rocket. This second rocket will attract the attention of someone on the ship that was next to them. Those are the ones who will try to rescue them. During these moments, Le Bayesian will rear up and then it will sink and disappear under the flares. Around 4:53, the ship that was docked next to it, the Baden-Powell, had sent a small motorboat with members of its own crew. They had already rescued the survivors from the Bayesian and were bringing them back to the ship. So they took them on board the Baden-Powell and immediately set off again. That means the captain or the skipper of the Bayesian went back to search for other survivors. Meanwhile, the crew of the Baden-Powell was contacting the Italian Coast Guard, who were just starting to move to come and help as well. We won't find anyone else. All 15 rescued people were there, safe and sound. Apart from a few injured, a few people who had twisted or sprained something during their quick evacuation, or rather their fall from the ship. Well, there are 7 of them that we can't find. And that's 100 of the people who are going to die in the Bayesian, for some under very specific conditions. That is to say, statistically, we can already see that out of the 10 crew members, 9 of them made it out. One of them died. He was the chief, the ship's cook, but 9 made it out. Which means that as a crew member, you had a 90% chance of making it out. Why? Because the crew members know the ship very well. They're more used to walking around in it, navigating it, and all that. Unlike the guests, some of whom had only been there for 5 days and for the first time. Whereas the people who work on the ship know everything, including a bit of what goes on behind the scenes. So they can get outside very quickly, and on top of that, they had woken up before the others. Another thing, if we look at the guests, there are 12 of them, and out of those 12, 6 of them died. That means the guests had about a 50% chance of not making it. So we see that it was literally 5 times more likely to lose your life. That night, The investigation is about to begin. And meanwhile, already on the very first day, the manufacturer, the shipyard that built it, that designed it, the Bayesian designers began saying that wasn't possible. Something must have happened. This isn't normal. This ship can't sink. We don't understand. And yet, what happened is that the British Marine Accident Investigation Branch, got involved. Well, they started to look into the details, into the construction. Then, they also involved a naval university that actually conducted a stability study of the Bayesian. And what are we going to discover? We'll discover several things. First, the stability study was always done with the keel fully extended. That means what we did. We did studies with 3 different loadings. The ship is extremely loaded, and that's when it has maximum stability. The heavier it is, the lower it sits in the water, lowering its center of gravity and increasing stability. We created an intermediate loading value and then a light configuration. Light configuration is worse. In the case we're interested in, since this ship was at the end of its journey, it was in the worst configuration. That means 90% of the consumables were gone. The water, the fuel, all of that, everything that adds weight, any ballast had already been used up, so it was in the worst configuration. Moreover, the acquisition hadn't been released, so why hadn't the acquisition been released? It's not mentioned in the report yet, but it seems that there is. The next problem is that the acquisition is placed at the end of a telescopic arm that will take it 10 meters away. This arm, given its length, given the 60-ton weight at the end, and because it's telescopic and extends right out from the hull of the ship, well, it can move with the current, and by moving with the current, it can hit, it can go tap, 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 it can make a noise. Metal against metal, apparently. That's why sometimes we prefer to pull it up to minimize the lever arm, to minimize or completely eliminate the noise. That way, there's no noise. It was probably a matter of comfort. Because otherwise, if we look at where the ship sank, well, it sank in 50 meters of water. So by sinking in 50 meters of water, we can see that there was enough draft to allow for extending the gain to 10 meters. That wasn't a choice that was made, unfortunately. Otherwise, it could have saved the ship. The study, specifically from the University of Southampton, will reveal an absolutely terrible detail. It will reveal that the ship, which we thought could go beyond 90 degrees, because with extended stability, it could go up to 91 or 92 degrees. That means it could tip over completely and come back up. Well, they discovered that if the stability is not fully extended, this counterpoint is not extended. Starting from 60 degrees, it gets into a situation of increasing imbalance. That means from 60 degrees of tilt, the chances of seeing it come back are almost zero. It won't come back. That means from 70 degrees, it will tip over. They also found that it was likely to tip over in this way permanently in relatively weak winds, much weaker than what we had anticipated. Is there an aerodynamic factor here? That is to say, we see that from about 63 knots, we're talking about a little over 120 kilometers per hour. Roughly, I'll give you the exact conversion during editing. At 63 knots, we're at 501. Without the experience, it will quite willingly go to 70 degrees or more, especially when it's light. When 90% of the consumables were gone, like that day, so this ship was a trap. It was a ship just waiting to capsize one day. That means every time it was operated with the experience brought back up, it should have been done. A wind that is not exceptional, that is not of biblical strength. We're not referring to a wind that appears once every 100 years, but one you encounter occasionally on the Mediterranean. Several times a year, he would wait for this kind of wind before going to bed. Let me add a detail for you. The mast is a streamlined aluminum design. The cross-section resembles an airplane wing. Researchers at the University of Southampton found it creates aerodynamic lift. That means when the air hits it at an angle, and they say up to 20 degrees, below 20 degrees it adds force. Actually, it's just an airplane wing. It's lift. I mentioned it when I talked about the video, when it was in the news last year. Actually, they even found that from 20 degrees on, this aerodynamic effect, that from 20 degrees on, this aerodynamic effect weakens. What does that mean? It means the wing stalls at 20 degrees. Because when we look at airplane wings, we see that from a certain angle of attack, we reach stall. This time we have little lift left and more drag than lift. The mast's 20-degree lift is likely the angle of attack for the Max's wings. It's there, and then it drops sharply. But in reality, it was attacked at an angle that was unfortunately optimal. See there? He went down. Let's put the other thing. Already when? Then we sent the divers, because for several days we sent the divers down to 50 meters deep. They didn't have much time. They only had 8 meters. They only had 8 minutes of autonomy before they had to come back up. Divers can't dive multiple times daily in those conditions, so you need many divers and must rotate them quickly. Actually, they even had a death. One of the divers was killed during the exploration of the BAYESIAN. And inside, it's very difficult to move around. Why? Because there are overturned pieces of furniture and all that. It's not easy to move around. The couple I mentioned who escaped their cabin at 3:30 fled when they woke up. Well, they said that when they had to leave the cabin, since it was tilted, that's what you have to take into account. They had to climb it. They had to climb over shelves. Because what happens is that if you're in a cabin and it's horizontal, well, you're just there. The door's ahead. When the cabin tilts 60 degrees, you're at the bottom of a shaft with the door on the ceiling. So you have to climb up. It's not always easy, especially with many falling objects. That's why furniture is usually secured so it doesn't fall. But the mattresses on top, the books, the decorations, the trinkets, the luggage, the suitcases, the shoes, everything falls down. That can cause obstacles. These people had to climb over things to leave their cabin. So, does that give you an idea of how hard it was for those who were still there when the ship was at 90 degrees? And let me add one more detail. When they found some bodies that were brought up to us, the autopsy found no water in their lungs. They didn't die from drowning, but from asphyxiation. What does that mean? That means that, sometimes when ships sink, there are air pockets that form. In those pockets, a person can find refuge, but there's little air. This soil, by the way, compresses. It compresses a bit like a syringe that contains air, and when you press it, you compress the soil. It will compress, heat slightly, and its volume will decrease. And the thing is, several people, it seems, got stuck in air pockets for several days, and then, well, they died because there was no more oxygen. Because what happens is that in an air pocket, it depends on its size, of course. There was once a sailor in Africa who survived for several days until he was rescued. He survived for several days in a wreck that was at the bottom of the water. The divers we sent weren't there to save anyone. We believed the people were dead and just wanted to recover the bodies for their families. And when the divers emerged with their flashlights and all that in that space, they found a guy who was there. He was alive, but he was already alone. So he was using up less than if there were several people. Also, since the space was large, he managed to hold on. But the people who were in the BAYESIAN were in relatively small air pockets, and there were several of them. And so, inevitably, the oxygen was consumed. And that's how, unfortunately, they lost their lives. So there you have it, my friends. That's a bit about the BAYESIAN. The final report hasn't been released yet, but I think now we know the main points. Thank you for watching this video up to this point. And I'll see you in the next one. I need to make an update on the title. See you very soon.